All right, are we ready to go, Madam Clerk?
Yes, we have quorum.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to call this meeting to order. At this time, I would like to acknowledge that we meet on the traditional land of Treaty 6 territory and acknowledge the diverse indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, such as Cree, Dene, Soru, Blackfoot, Dakota Sioux, as well as Métis and Inuit, and now settlers from around the world. I will do a quick roll call of committee members. Councillor Wright. Councillor Wright, are you there? We'll wait. Councillor Knack.
Good morning.
Councillor Principe.
Good morning.
Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Rutherford. Mr. Burrows. And Mr. Edmonton, I see you there. Okay, Mr. Burrows has joined us as well. Good. And I see some other colleagues joining us. I will go through the list here. Councillor Tang is here in person. And Councillor Wright, I see you there. Are you there? Councillor Jans. Councillor Cartmel. I see Tim there. Okay. All right, and Councillor Rutherford is joined us here too in person. Okay. Adoption of the agenda. Councillor Principe.
Mr. Mayor, can we just have someone from the meet maybe sound check just in case none of them can hear us?
Can folks hear us?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
I've heard from the clerk that you can't hear me.
Councillor
Now I
Stevenson.
can hear you.
Okay.
Excellent.
Councillor Stevenson, can you hear us? I think there might be something wrong with the system. Councillor Stevenson?
We can't hear the chair.
Oh, you can't? Oh, something's wrong with the system then.
Can you hear this microphone?
Can you hear this microphone? No. Okay, give us a moment while we see if we can fix the sound. We'll just have to pause, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. traditional land of Treaty 6 territory, acknowledge the diverse indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, such as Cree, Dene, Soru, Blackfoot, Nakota, Sioux, as well as Métis and Inuit, and now settlers from around the world. Do a quick roll call of council members. Councillor Wright?
Good morning, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Councillor Knack is here.
Good morning.
Councillor Principe is here.
Good morning.
Councillor Rutherford is here. Mr. Burrows, we see you there.
Good morning.
Mr. Edmonton,
Yes, I'm here. Good morning.
good morning. And I will do a quick roll call of other council colleagues who are not part of the committee but joining us. Let me start at the top. Councillor Stevenson,
Good morning. Hello.
Councillor Tang is here. Yeah. And Councillor Jans,
Good morning.
Councillor Cartmel. We see Councillor Cartmel. Good morning. Okay. Adoption of the agenda. Councillor Principe.
Thank you. I would like to move that the June 17th, 2022 Audit Committee meeting agenda be adopted with the following change. Replacement page 6.7, City of Edmonton Audit Committee Workshop.
Thank you, Councillor Principe. Please vote.
I'm a yes.
I'm a yes, too.
We have all the votes?
Display the votes, please. That is carried. Any protocol items? Seeing none.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, the gold sheet doesn't show the minutes, but we do have minutes too.
Yeah, right. Minutes. Councillor Knack.
Apologies.
It's all good. I will, Mayor Sohi, I will move the adoption of the minutes for the following meetings: for the March 18th, 2022 Audit Committee, the March 18th, 2022 Audit Selection Committee, the April 12th, 2022 Special Audit Committee, the May 18th, 2022 Audit Committee Non-Regular, and the May 26th, 2022 Audit Selection Committee. And there is one small change, and I'm sorry, I should have flagged it this morning when I walked in the door. Just one small adjustment to the March 18th Audit Selection Committee minutes. Nope, that's not the right agenda. Hold on, I made a note somewhere. Sorry, April 12th Special Audit Committee. It showed as present Mayor Sohi, but you weren't at that meeting. In the roll call, it correctly shows it, but just in the top section for present, it shows you, and you weren't here. So
Okay.
just make that small change. So I'm moving that as amended.
Good. Thank you, Councillor Knack. All right, please vote for the acceptance of the minutes.
I vote yes.
We're waiting on one vote.
It didn't come up. I'm a no. Simply, yeah, I'm a no.
We have all the votes?
Oh, in,
I didn't have a chance to read the minutes
have the
because
e-scribe?
in an e-scribe they're not there on the one I have, so I didn't read them as part of the agenda package. So I don't want to say yes, I didn't read them.
okay, got it. Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. All right, please vote. You got the votes? Display the votes, please. That is carried. Okay, now protocol items. None. Select items for select items for debate. Councillor Knack.
Thank you, Mayor Sohi. I will select items 6162 and 6364.
And got it. Councillor Rutherford.
I'll select 6.5, please.
And 6.6 there. And,
Oh, okay,
cross-referenced.
and 6.6 because they're cross-referenced.
Okay, that's it. Okay. Can someone move to vote on the rest? Councillor Principe, you want to do that?
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Principe. Please vote.
Vote yes.
Okay, I'm a yes, and can I have someone from IT help me?
Thank you.
You gotta click on the.
Maybe also just confirm that you're in the April 17th audit. There is an audit, sorry, June 17th, there's an audit selection as well.
Yeah, so you gotta go to the first meeting. Okay, got it.
We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. That is carried.
Would you like me to read, Mr. Mayor, what we have voted on?
Yes, please, yeah.
So the June 17th Audit Committee has approved 6.7 City of Edmonton Audit Committee Workshop.
Okay. All right, so that is done. Request to speak, none. Request per specific time on agenda, none. Councillor inquiries? Seeing none. Reports to be dealt at a different time, no. Request to reschedule reports, none. Now we are going into our first item, 6.1 and 6.2 cross-reference, and we'll go over to our city auditor for a presentation, right?
Good morning, Mayor, councillors, and public members of the committee. As usual, before we start, joining me are the office's Deputy City Auditors, Janine Raglad. And then I want to introduce you to Sharon Hahn, who started with the office in April of 2022. You can raise your hand, Sharon. And
Welcome.
And one other guest I'd like to introduce, Premium, forgive me, but I'd like to introduce you to Premium Ufin-Tinkindi. He's an audit manager at the Office of the Auditor General of Rwanda. Premium is here on his fellowship through the Canadian Audit and Accountability Foundation's international program. The Office of the City Auditor has had a proud history of working with the CAAF's international program in which we exchange fellows, and we both learn from the Edmonton perspective and the other country's perspective. So welcome, Premium.
Welcome to Edmonton. Okay.
All right, next slide, please. The homelessness audit, I read a newspaper article recently in which you were quoted, Mayor, as saying some of the challenges we're facing, including homelessness, is complex and interconnected. And I think homelessness is definitely one of those in terms of root causes. There's social stigma, mental health, housing, and a bunch of other root causes. But the challenge itself also comes with a myriad of different stakeholders from the federal, provincial government, and to a whole bunch of agencies and partners that we need to work with. So let me frame the audit clearly, because we included a large section on the role of the federal government, the provincial government, as well as the city and its funding, which you can find on page 39 of the package. And that funding goes to an entity called Homeward Trust, which is designated by all three entities to lead the implementation of Edmonton's homelessness plan. That means day-to-day operations and the strategy itself. Because of the funding relationship between Homeward Trust and mainly the federal and provincial government, it was out of scope of this audit. And we want to make sure that there's clarity around the different players and where funding goes. But if you look at the slide on the bottom right side, the city does provide a variety of programs and services to respond to homelessness, from affordable housing, shelter accommodations, responses to encampments, and a bunch of other activities. So our audit objective was to look at whether the city coordinates these internal homelessness activities to reduce chronic or episodic homelessness. And again, I want to reiterate, Homeward Trust was not in the scope of this audit. Next slide, please. So in our audit, we found that the city does deliver a variety of different programs. However, we did have two findings. One, really, we could not find a plan within the city for the city's internal homelessness activities. And what one would expect to see certain things in a plan that would bring all these moving pieces together. Number one, clear objectives, goals, and measures. Two, a clear understanding of who's accountable for the overall delivery of homelessness for the City of Edmonton. 3, better coordination and integration, not just within the programs and the services that the city provides, but also integration and coordination with the various stakeholders that are part of the program. And lastly, a full understanding of the costs associated with the city's homelessness activities. Our other finding is the second bullet, is that we did find that the city had one outcome measure, which is the end chronic or episodic homelessness, and a few other smaller operational measures. However, we thought that a more robust approach to defining measures and targets could help administration, and more importantly, leveraging those measures and targets to evaluate the progress that the city is making on homelessness. So what you do see on the bottom of the slide are 3 recommendations. 1, develop a plan. 2, assign clear accountability for homelessness. And 3, evaluate the program with good measures and targets. Oh, I highlighted in yellow, and I should say it all the time. A huge thanks for the folks in the various departments who support the city in terms of responding to homelessness. Look, it's a complex issue. It's challenging. And I know the team has told me that those that are working the front lines are absolutely passionate about this issue. And a quick thanks to the audit team, Sophia, Queen, and Janine, who were able to complete this audit in a fairly timely manner. And that would be it from the office.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Now we go to administration in response. That's the next step, Madam Clerk, right? Because these are cross-referenced.
Yes,
so we
that's
go to administration for the response?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Before I begin my remarks, I just want to say thank you for acknowledging the complexity, the multiple layers of governance, the different funding arrangements, and who ultimately has responsibility when it comes to addressing homelessness in Canada and in the province. As I mentioned, in Canada, provincial and federal governments control the most significant housing-related policy levers. Historically, municipalities have tended to play a limited role due largely to the boundaries of our authority and resources. However, cities are impacted by homelessness and are uniquely positioned to describe local needs. In recognition of this, federal and provincial funding programs have encouraged the designation of a local community-based entity to administer funds for addressing homelessness. And has already been mentioned, that group in Edmonton is Homeward Trust. The city works closely with Homeward Trust to support their efforts in implementing Edmonton's whole community plan to end and prevent homelessness. Administration's significant efforts to ensure the development of supportive housing is one example of this partnership. In recent years, Edmonton City Council has also directed administration to intervene directly in specific areas of homelessness response. Most often, these interventions have been in areas where the city's operational responsibilities interact with people experiencing homelessness, for example, when it comes to encampment response or transit safety. However, the city has also invested considerable resources to strengthen the crisis response to homelessness during periods of extreme weather and during the public health emergency caused by COVID-19. In these instances, the City of Edmonton worked closely with the Government of Alberta to support its efforts to adapt the shelter system as required to meet the challenges posed by the pandemic. As a result of the city's efforts and investments, thousands of Edmontonians experiencing homelessness have been provided with increased access to services that allow them to meet their basic needs with dignity and connect to housing and other support services as part of a sustainable resolution to their experiences of homelessness. As we transition into the post-pandemic recovery period, there is an opportunity to further clarify the city's future's goals and specific role in addressing homelessness. Administration accepts all 3 recommendations presented by the Office of the City Auditor in this report on the city's homelessness response, namely to develop a corporate-wide plan for our homelessness response, assign accountability for the delivery of that plan, and include more robust performance measurement and evaluation in that plan. The management responses for all 3 recommendations will seek to align with, build upon, and integrate with all relevant community and government strategies and plans that relate to homelessness, including but not limited to the Community Safety and Wellbeing Strategy recently approved by City Council in May 2022, the recommendations from the Government of Alberta's Coordinated Community Response to Homelessness Task Force, expected to be released later this month, Canada's National Housing Strategy, which includes the goal of halving chronic homelessness by 2030, and Edmonton's community plan to end homelessness, the current plan, A Place to Call Home, Edmonton's updated plan to prevent and end homelessness, will be replaced by a new strategy that accounts for post-pandemic realities. Homeward Trust is expected to initiate work on this later this year. The work on implementation of the management responses can begin right away, beginning with research on successful models used in other municipalities in Canada and beyond. This research and analysis will help us determine what kinds of plans, accountability structures, and evaluation programs work best for the delivery of corporate-wide homelessness response plans. Committed to any and all continuous improvement efforts, we will adapt our learnings for the Edmonton context and are confident that we can have a new, integrated, and even more effective corporate homelessness response in place by December of next year. Thank you, and we are pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for that response, and we will go to council colleagues, committee members for questions. Councillor Knack, you exempted this item, and I'll go to you first.
Thank you, Mayor Sohi, and thanks so much for the audit and for the additional information. The only question I had relates more to the administrative side and just around the budget breakdown. So I know the audit pulled out some numbers from that, and I'm just curious if we are developing a holistic sort of combination of what we're actually spending each and every year on this, because I thought we had talked about that, I don't know, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, about trying to make sure we had all of those numbers so that we could also share that with the province so that they had a sense of what we're actually spending every year, oftentimes managing the issue versus solving the issue. So are we looking to get all of that into one place?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Knack. Yes, I believe that would be part of the work going forward in terms of the one coordinated plan that would identify all of the pieces that feed into our goals and costing for that purposes. We have done estimates in the past of the overall cost to the city of homelessness, but it is really, we've never done it in a thorough and exhaustive way. I think that the opportunity will be presented now with a coordinated plan that incorporates all of our activities. So we've done snapshots and estimates based on sort of, assumptions, wide assumptions, but we haven't thoroughly costed absolutely every aspect of it, and I think that's work that can certainly be done with this recommendation.
So appreciating that the recommendation isn't looking to be completed till next year, as we come up to budget, is there a way to start compiling some of just the cost piece to make sure we have a sense of, to try to get a better sense of what we're spending so that when we go into our 4-year budget deliberations, we can know where our money's going, at least get a better sense of where that money's going?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no problem to do another estimate, at least a high-level estimate of the overall cost for the purposes of communicating that. And then obviously, the budget will be clear in terms of the way it's presented to you with service packages, which ones are responding to homelessness or not. So you'll be able to see that in the way that the budget documents are presented. So we could add those all up for you at that point too, if that's what you're looking for.
I think it might be helpful for me, and I won't speak for my colleagues, just because I know this is a massive issue we're trying to tackle, but the one part I took away from the audit is I'm not quite sure how effectively all of the money's being used. And again, appreciating that we're not the order of government that's actually supposed to be doing all of this, but we're going to do our best. The only other question then in that is if we can try to get information from EPS as to how much they spend on this, because I know sometimes they're included in encampment responses, and I'd like to get a better understanding of their dollar amount they invest. I know we got it, for an example, when we did that study of Ambrose Place, which was really valuable to understand how much we saved for policing by having the right response, but it'd be nice to understand what EPS is spending each and every year on that when we go into that budget.
Yeah, I don't think that would be a problem to work through the commission administratively to see what we can determine. And I think it is important. You're kind of touching on two issues. Yeah. One is the costs that our administration incurs as a result of homelessness. And then one is the deliberate expenditures and investments that we make to try and reduce the costs that we're incurring.
That's right.
Right. And so I think that having that clarity is important. And that's a lens that we could bring to this work for you before budget.
And that was sort of the main goal, is that I'm trying to get a sense of, are we spending X millions here on just responding, and could we take that and better, have our proactive planning. It's something we ask for of the other orders of government. We want to make sure we're doing that as best as possible. And I know there have been unique circumstances over the last 2 years where we've had no choice but to just go and spend money on this. But hopefully with this budget cycle, we can take some deliberate actions to try to redirect as best as possible, because I know you're trying to do that work already, but okay. Those are my questions. Thank you, Mayor Sohi.
Thank you, Councillor Knack. Councillor Rutherford?
Yes, thank you so much. I really grappled with this report, actually, because it feels like we're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Because even when I read this, it says that we're not coordinated, but a lot of the response was in reaction to the pandemic. So of course we're not coordinated, because we were in crisis mode. So to me, it's not surprising, but also it begs a question of what is our role going forward? And like, if we create a strategy, is it going to be from the lens of doing more or doing, yeah, and like what you said too, yeah, so I'm going to start with that one. Like, what, with your recommendation one, and this is to the city auditor, is there a tension there of like, we have this bigger plan that includes multiple players like Homeward Trust? What is our actual role in reducing homelessness? Because I see it as only one of those pillars that you discussed. Because encampment is a response, it's a cost of homelessness. Policing is a response, it's a cost of homelessness. The only one that I see in that diagram that you mentioned is the supportive and affordable housing construction.
So when I look to the recommendation, which is to create the plan, the intent is to provide clarity on what is the mandate and the objective of the city. It will also clarify the scope. Are we doing too much or doing too little? And what are the decisions that we're going to make in terms of investments as well? So the plan will give you that direction, is the hope.
Because I would also suspect that a lot of the lack of strategy is because much of this has been politicized as well. And so there's been a lot of motions from council that are one-off motions. Would that be a fair assessment from your audit? And not that it's a bad thing, because we needed to do what we needed to do. But I think that we also have to, we forget that there's a political factor here as well. So we can have the best strategy, but if we as a council continually direct different things, then that's going to affect the strategy. And maybe that's a question for admin, I don't know, but.
Go ahead,
I think absolutely. I think the political interest in this area has expanded the city's role in homelessness. I don't think there's any question about that. When we did our municipal reference model on this core city services a few years ago, there wasn't a homelessness service in that reference model. And now that we're looking at updating it, we're looking at adding that in because our role has grown and expanded. So I think the previous council really directed us to focus on supportive housing as our main contribution to the community plan to reduce and end homelessness. And you've seen the city's taken on a big chunk, but all of these other operational responses have been have evolved over time, at council direction, which is absolutely council's prerogative. And so we have, we've passed in 2019, you passed the extreme weather policy that established a role for the city in protecting vulnerable people during extreme weather. Obviously, the pandemic was a very unique situation and crisis response, and
but the thing that I struggle with is like, we're not going to create goals or targets for those, because it's like, even if you think about extreme weather, we're not saying we're trying to reduce it. It's literally a harm reduction at that point.
I think the challenge in these recommendations for us, but not one that we're shying away from, will be to come up with meaningful metrics that may not be directly related to an overall reduction in homelessness to describe the effectiveness of our response.
Okay, I like that. I like that. And then the one thing that it doesn't mention in this in terms of a city role is policy. And I wanted you to speak to potentially, why that was out of scope of this audit. So for example, in just that affordable housing space, there are some policy levers that I feel like we're not fully utilizing. Should that be a part of that strategy going forward, or was that out of scope of this audit for any specific reason?
So generally, the Office of City Auditor stays away from policy, which is the realm of council. What we audit to is how effective or efficient administration is implementing those policies. I'm not an elected person, so I can't kind of comment on those
No,
policies.
that's a good, I didn't know that, that makes absolute sense now that you say that, but I think that it's important to say in this space that we as a council need to be looking at those policy levers better. I think it was very informative considering the scope was so tight, rightfully so. Great work and great, looking forward to admin's work on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Principe? Oh, Councillor Wright? Councillor Wright?
Thank you. I'm just, I guess, to the city auditor, when looking at developing goals and that, using the SMART acronym, you know, part of it is that the goals are achievable, and because there's such a huge variable with the funding to support this, I'm just wondering, are any of the goals achievable without knowing exactly what our provincial and federal partners are providing for funding?
Thank you, Councillor. I think inherently when you create performance measures, there are some measures where you have a little bit of control over, some where you have much more control over, and I think that's always a challenge in creating these measures. You know, when I think about this topic, and I think the team asked me, well, what would be an okay example of a performance measure for, you know, dealing with homelessness? So one of the things, you know, if self-sufficiency is an objective of responding to homelessness, which one would assume it might be, then maybe a measure would be the number of individuals who are employed through our services and program. So that measure in itself, we don't fully control, but we may be able to influence through some of our programs and services. So I think it's just a matter of being able to come up with measures that actually inform us of the effectiveness of what we're doing with our programs and services.
So then would those measures, I guess, have the effect that we need it to have?
I'll have to ask for clarification as to which measures.
I'm just going back to your slide here. Well, just when we talk about just overall, you know, helping with our affordable housing strategy, how can we enact an affordable housing strategy without having those funding partners?
Councillor Wright, that's a good question and one that we have grappled with at the city, but I think we've actually come up with a solution around this, which is we'll talk more about next week with the Affordable Housing Investment Plan that's coming to committee, or sorry, on the 27th. But basically what we do is we try to we take a strategic approach that focuses on ensuring that we have the conditions in place to secure investment from other orders of government. And what that's looked like on affordable housing and with supportive housing specific to homelessness is we ensure there's land and shovel-ready projects that are capable of garnering funding when it does become available. And so that has been the basis underlying our last affordable housing investment plan, and we have experienced some success related to that approach. And so that we would probably look at doing something similar in this realm insofar as it required investment from us. It's like, how do we put the conditions in place to get the investment when those orders of government are ready to make those decisions.
Okay, so I guess managing what's in our control then,
and trying to do so in a way, that limits our exposure or limits the amount that we need to commit on our own.
Okay.
And Councillor, if I can just add, this entire conversation around performance measurement, it can divide in terms of a sphere of influence, and that comes down to indicators as well. So I think as we build out this evaluation plan, we'll be very clear on what are measures and what are indicators, because both are play in this space.
All right, thank you. I look forward to the report coming back then on the affordable housing. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Principe?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A lot of my questions were already answered, but I do have a question. I'm a little bit confused in the roles. In the report, I read that all levels of government chose Homeward Trust to be the system coordination role. And I'm hearing today that a lot of Homeward Trust's work is through council direction. So I'm a little confused there.
That is a very good question. So I could explain a little bit more about the relationships. So the last plan to end homelessness was co-developed by the city and Homeward Trust together. And when council reviewed the report or the plan to end homelessness, this is a 2017 plan, council chose to endorse the plan, not approve it, but endorse it in recognition of the fact that approving the plan, like that they didn't have the full accountability for the community plan. And in 2010, the plan before that was actually developed by the City of Edmonton and then given to Homeward Trust to implement. So at that strategic plan level, there is a very close relationship, at least historically there has been, and we expect that going forward with this new plan as well, where the city does work closely with Homeward Trust on the plan. And then a lot of times council has directed us to get more involved in homelessness in the last few years, and we've worked with really closely with Homeward Trust in partnership to do what council wants, even though council doesn't have formal authority over Homeward Trust outside of the 1.2 funding that we provide, right? And so we've developed an extremely close working relationship in the last few years where they've been willing to, you know, adjust and pivot and respond to the direction that we've been getting administratively. And honestly, I don't think there's very many cities across Canada that have as good of a relationship between their CBO or their community entity and the city. And so I think, like personally, I'm grateful to Homeward Trust for helping us when we sometimes get direction from council and we can't control it. And I hope that will continue going forward. And I don't have any reason to believe that it will change. But it's a nuanced relationship, and it's not formal authority. It's influence that we have through good relationships.
Okay, great. And I heard that are there metrics in place or indicators, or is that something that we're planning to do?
So what we in specific areas of initiatives, like with respect to encampment response, or when we stand up a shelter, we've had evaluations completed on that, or we've had performance metrics specific to like a niche part of the response. But I think with this recommendation, what we'd be moving towards is a corporate-wide framework that would provide evaluation metrics for all aspects of the city's response to homelessness. So that's what's being proposed.
Okay, so where's the accountability then with the metrics?
Well, that is also part of the recommendations from the auditor, is to for the city manager to clearly appoint someone who's accountable for the implementation of the plan. So that will be part of the work that's done as part of these recommendations as well.
Okay, so that would be more on the city side than on the Homeward Trust side?
That's right.
Because they're not in the scope of the audit, correct? Yeah.
That's right, because the plan would be for the City of Edmonton's portion of the response, or its response, which would include our own operational response, as well as any mandate that that council chooses us to take on with respect to implementing the community plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, thank you. And then another question. We discussed decentralization this week, and that is a concern. Amity House, which is a resource center, a community service center in my ward, they came to me and, they're concerned because we're seeing an increase of need of services around the city, not just central. Is that something that we're also considering in this?
The Chinatown Action Plan has a recommendation to look at a 5-year decentralization strategy for social services agencies. So I think we're too early in that work to understand exactly what that's going to look like. But I mean, considering that we're talking about agencies serving people experiencing homelessness, you could see how if we are going to action a plan like that, that would roll into the overall corporate response, yes.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just to follow up, like the limited role that we play as a city absolutely will benefit from the implementation of these recommendations, right? Would that also, that coordination, just following up to Councilor Knack's questions, would you have enough resources in order to undertake some of their work? For example, how much does it cost responding to houselessness, right? That's one category. How much are we investing as a city to end houselessness? And also further resources around what are the policy levers, Councilor Rutherford's question around. So would that coordination is important, but would there be enough resources for us to do that kind of work that we can be as effective as possible?
What an excellent question and well-timed. No, it's true. we have limited resources in terms of the people that are on our team,
Yeah.
and they are doing their level best to do all the things. If there are more things required, as per these recommendations, then we would need to evaluate and either reprioritize what we do
Yeah.
and or augment our resources to adequately address the things that we're asking our folks to do.
So will you come back to committee or council, and how you're going to implement these recommendations, and what additional resources would be required for it to be effective?
Yes, that would be a wise thing for us to do.
Okay, because that is important. Otherwise, we'll go back to the, I know, Ms. Kajana, I admire the work and the resources and time you and your team has been putting into this issue, right? So it's not. I'm pretty sure that's the understanding of a city auditor as well. So this is not a critique of the work. It's more about what can we do more, right? And so really appreciate that. I want to acknowledge that. So appreciate that. But I want to go to some of the other broader issues and roles and responsibilities. It's my understanding that Homeward Trust's base level funding has not been increased over the last number of years in order to respond to houselessness numbers being doubled during pandemic. Am I correct in that assessment?
The base funding that they receive from the City of Edmonton and the GOA has not increased substantially recently. From the federal government, they have seen an increase, but it's time limited associated with the pandemic.
Right.
And so this year it was in the budget again. I think they got a $10 million increase, but it's only it's set to expire in 1 year kind of thing. So there's no certainty beyond that.
Yeah, but the main funder of Homeward Trust is the province.
That's correct. Yeah.
And that funding has not been increased.
It's increased slightly in the last few years, but it's I wouldn't say it very significantly.
Not, of course, not enough to match the numbers that we have increased. Another thing, I think we got a memo from just looking at here. It was from you, Ms. Flamen, on the shelter capacity. And there were numbers shared with us about how underfunded Edmonton's shelter spaces are compared to Calgary. For example, here in Edmonton, we have 634 permanently funded emergency shelter spaces in Edmonton compared to 1,758 spaces in Calgary. Is there a reason? Like, what is the reason? Why that discrepancy? Is Calgary's houseless situations worse than Edmonton's, or is just historically we have not been properly funded compared to Calgary?
We've been told it's more legacy, why it is that way. And the province is very open to conversations around how we as a system can respond to people experiencing homelessness, regardless of where they find themselves. So administratively, there is a real openness to dig into exactly what you're observing.
That is very, very refreshing to know. I'm glad that that conversation is happening. I do have other questions, but I'll come back to those, and I'll go to Councillor Stevenson next.
Hi, good morning. Sorry. Yes, thank you so much for the report. I think this was, really timely, really well done. I think, the chart showing how the different city areas that are all involved in homelessness was really very striking to me. I was thinking, oh, we have such a coordinated response, but it's such a true point that it is a thread across many different areas. I appreciate Councillor Knack earlier raising just the importance of capturing the costs that we incur due to homelessness. I think that's really critical in terms of making the value proposition for the investments we make. And I was just wondering too, just one thing I wasn't entirely clear in the report and maybe in the plan moving forward is how the value of land that we contribute to homelessness is captured. Because I think the land contributions we've made to housing and homelessness is, a really important part that we play, and I don't know that that was captured in the audit.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Stevenson. The land costs specifically tied to homelessness would be in terms of the land for supportive housing, and that would have been captured in the costs associated with supportive housing development in the audit.
Okay, and so I guess that brings up another really tricky question in terms of the line between like homelessness and housing affordability, and just wondering how we tease those out, because I think investments in affordable housing, so for example through the AHIP program, you know, do a lot to mitigate homelessness or prevent homelessness.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Councillor Stevenson. Obviously, some of the affordable housing that we're developing, it would not necessarily be affordable to people on who've recently been homeless or have very weak labor market attachment and are reliant on government benefits. But we do contribute to affordable housing projects beyond supportive housing that are geared to lower incomes. It's a little bit difficult, and it's a bit of a judgment call, I suppose. But ultimately, we know that the one thing that unites everybody experiencing homelessness is that they don't have a house, or they're not housed. And so, I mean, insofar as all of our efforts are around making housing more affordable and accessible, on the affordable housing side, you could argue that all of that is preventing homelessness. And also, even though it's probably the deeper subsidy stuff that's more directly responding and intervening against homelessness, if that makes sense. And we could capture those costs for sure. Like all of our costs, everything we're investing in housing is very clear and well known.
Okay, yeah, and I think, you know, I'm torn because I think it's important to sort of have the full picture, but at the same time it makes it more complex and less sort of really transparent. The other piece I just want to flag was just, you know, I think that there, sorry, my presence is being requested elsewhere, but just very quickly, just in the plan, I think there's a great point about how we need to focus on internal coordination, but also just thinking how we need to position, as part of that strategy, how the city positions itself for funding from other orders of government. Is that something that can be part of the plan, the internal coordination plan moving forward in terms of that sort of like external relations coordination too?
Yeah, I think so, Councillor Stevenson, because the city has been playing a role like that already, you know, with council, this council and previous council. Administration has been supporting council's advocacy of trying to align the three orders of government around the same political priorities when it comes to supportive housing and other aspects of this issue. And so I don't think that there would be any need to change that, although just recognizing that we coordinate on the admin side all the time, and we can support council to coordinate on the political side as well.
Yeah, and I was thinking specifically too just around initiatives like the Shovel Ready Working Group, where there was a really concerted effort to have projects ready so that when funding at the other orders of government became available, they were sort of ready made. Anyway, my last minute though, I did really just want to dig into you know, the need for this type of review to happen at the sector level, and also particularly with Homer Trust. I mean, again, I think this audit really demonstrates that audits provide a great opportunity to understand how we can strengthen and improve our practices. So just wondering what the opportunities might be for, you know, with our annual funding contribution to Homer Trust, if we could potentially have some of that review information included in this year's report, and if there's an opportunity to do that collaboratively with Homer Trust and then potentially with the broader sector as well.
Sorry, which information were you suggesting, Councillor Stevenson, would be included in the review?
So it'd be a similar audit to what's just been done for the city's homelessness work, but just to do a similar audit of Homer Trust to identify opportunities for strengthening practices, and just, you know, assess the efficacy of the work that they're doing that would help inform our future contributions to that organization and help improve like the overall community goal of ending homelessness.
So Councillor Stevenson, as was identified in this audit, we don't have the scope to do an audit of Homer Trust. Homer Trust is governed by a board of directors, and they would have an audit and finance committee. So
totally understanding. I guess maybe then the question is, have they ever done something like this?
That I do not know, but that is a question we can ask them for sure and get back to you.
Good. Thank you, Councillor Stevenson, and say hi to Easy for us. Yeah. Councillor Tang, next.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I actually thought it was a very interesting report to read, as always. And really, you're really boosting my interest in audits, and that's great. I guess just quickly following up on that last question, because it kind of reminded me of sort of the ecosystem approach back when we were discussing the community well-being and safety strategy, which is just as complex and interconnected, and I mean, this is all part of it, right? And maybe it's not an audit, but I feel like that will be sort of a standalone exercise we will have to do at some point. I mean, that's something I will be very interested in, so just want to flag that for you, not so much a question. I guess to the city auditor, I guess if you can just educate me on the methodology a little bit. For these recommendations, do you generally engage too with partners and advocates in the community, like a temperature check, the feedback, or is that part of the follow-up that administration will undertake?
We will engage with different stakeholders of a particular program and services as part of our audit.
Oh, okay.
But in terms of the follow-up work, it'll generally be with administration to see whether they're fully implementing our recommendation by the stated dates.
So then did you do kind of a temperature check with these recommendations for this one?
In terms of temperature check, if I interpret that properly, if you mean whether the recommendations are dealing with the root cause of what we found in the audit, we generally will work with administration. Okay. If there are stakeholders engaged, we do reach out to them. A good example would be the next audit, the Arterial Roadway assessment program, in which there are developers involved. Okay. We did engage with the developer community.
Yeah, I mean, that was just something that I was curious about how, there's so many folks working kind of on the advocacy front and the delivery front, lots of different fronts, and how do they feel this is sufficient? Are we going far enough internally? But do you want to respond?
I would just say, Councillor Tang, for sure. I mean, in putting together the corporate plan around homelessness, we would do engagement. I think that's a key part. Yeah, we're doing that with affordable housing, and we would do that with homelessness as well.
Yeah, and I was wondering too, Ms. Kajener, you spoke really well to the work that Edmonton is doing recently at the FCM conference, and my takeaway from that was, wow, we're really a leader in the space. And I guess I'm just wondering, for the city auditor, in your research and analysis, what municipalities are doing well in terms of that integrated, coordinated, cross-departmental approach?
So with respect to homelessness, we did do some research around entities like Medicine Hat, which, by anecdotal accounts, have been successful in managing homelessness. However, it's really tough to compare apples to oranges, and even Macintosh apples to Gala apples. Sure. There are so many environmental factors that do influence what success looks like and what not success looks like. But I think there are opportunities to benchmark and look at other municipalities to see what they're doing and leverage what works best.
Yep.
Can I add? Yeah. I just want to make the point that I think sometimes this gets lost, but the 7 cities in Alberta are leaders nationally because of the Alberta government's investment in a plan to end homelessness in 2008 and funding that's continued. We were ahead of the game in terms of other cities. And so when we go to conferences around benchmarking and we talk about best practices with the cities across, most of them are looking to Edmonton, to be honest with you, in terms of the infrastructure that's already been implemented. Does that mean that I think that we're knocking our results out of the park? Like, obviously there's challenges beyond just the program level, but in terms of program and infrastructure, we're doing, we have as sophisticated as a system to address homelessness in the city as others do. Yeah. I think where there's room for improvement, and maybe other jurisdictions have done a bit better, is aligning those system actors to all push in the same direction. And we're optimistic that through these recommendations and also the community safety and well-being framework, there's the opportunity to do that going forward.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess there's the point about that accountability, and there's a lack of centralized team. I guess in my mind, I'm like, is that not the housing team out of social development? Isn't that your team who does work with colleagues across, the corporation? Is that, I guess not sufficient?
I think the challenge, and Jen, feel free to jump in, Jen. I think the challenge is there's a lot of really good coordination that happens cross-corporately, but it's done on a response basis. So like encampment response, we're very well coordinated internally. When we're standing up a shelter, we're very well coordinated internally. But it's that everyone is, for the most part, we have we don't have the resources to do this in a really sophisticated, ongoing way. We have 2 dedicated FTEs in my team that are responsible for most of that coordination. And when the response is so broad across the corporation and needs to have the strategic advocacy funding conversation feeding up as well, it's a lot of the work is happening off the side of people's desks.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Yeah, and if I could just add, 2 FTEs, a city of 1 million, 3 orders of government.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Principe?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for reminding me where I saw this information from the email from Ms. Flamen. In there, we see the bridge housing occupancy for the month of May was only 66%. So if we're looking at investing more in this, but we're only at 66% capacity, where's the disconnect?
There's a seasonal reality, and there's also the understanding that not every person on their journey is ready to accept the help that is available. So oftentimes it can take, 4, 5, 6, 7 months, even longer, depending on the complexities that folks are facing. It's not a linear, you have need, here is your need being met, here's the keys, the end.
I agree with you 100%, and I think sometimes that's where our disconnect is maybe sometimes we feel like we know best and this is how we should be housing, but really, we have to take that into consideration, that it's not linear. And when I saw that result, 66%, I thought, wow, that's quite low.
I would just add, though, I think also one of the largest facilities was transitioning to close, and so that may have impacted it, because they wouldn't be accepting new intakes at Coliseum Inn because they were planning to transition to flipping to permanent housing, so that may have impacted that stat as well, too, although it should have been noted in the briefing that you received.
Okay,
so apologies for that.
Yeah, no, that's good then. That makes me feel better. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just want to have a few other questions. Like if this coordination happens and you're allocated additional resources, would you be able to dig deeper into why do people fall into houselessness? I think that is not clear. Is it because of income? Is it because of people lose their jobs? Or is it because people are being dropped into the community who don't have a proper housing plan coming out of correctional facilities, hospitals, or persons in care of government? Or is it, intergenerational trauma that has damaged people to the level that they're, at a stage where, they need extensive interventions? I think I don't have a good understanding why do people fall into houselessness, right? So because that will help with advocacy as well, right? So some of the work, would enable you to do that kind of analysis working with Homeland Trust?
Yes, absolutely. And we're even starting to get more into that on the affordable housing needs assessment as well, which is work that's coming to you guys in a couple of weeks, and even more so in the fall, even more detail. But what we know is that it's the interplay of all of the factors that you described. Essentially, it's all of the above. So it's the interplay of structural factors, which are things like the economic conditions, right, and job availability of jobs, inflation, cost of living increases. All of those things make people more vulnerable in terms of maintaining their housing. And then it's also the interaction of those structural factors or system failures, which is, we know that there's, for example, we know if you experienced homelessness as a child, you are more almost at a very high risk of experiencing it again when you're an adult. We also know that people who are transitioning, making significant transitions, like from a correctional institute, from a health, from a institution that may have been meeting their healthcare needs, from being in care, moving to Canada as a newcomer, all of those transitions also make people a lot more vulnerable and at risk of experiencing homelessness. And then usually there's also the presence of some individual factors, which could mean experiences of personal crises, the presence of a disability. The number of people experiencing homelessness who have a disability is extremely high. Estimates, we don't have great data on it, but estimates are, 40 or 50%. There's a lot of individual factors that interplay with those system and structural factors to create homelessness in our society.
Yeah, and maybe I need to frame my question differently. There are people, we have close to 2,700 of our fellow Edmontonians who are experiencing houselessness, right? But out of those, I think 800 to 900 are people who we characterize them as chronic. houselessness? Like what would be the factors of this chronic houselessness?
Yeah, so absolutely we can get you, that's the kind of work that if this was resourced better, we could be providing you that type of information on a regular basis. Like the data does exist and Homer Trust has that data. It's just working with them on the analysis and feeding that up to council. For sure, risk of chronic homelessness, I mean, experiencing homelessness, the longer you're homeless, the harder it is to get housed, right? So we know that it's a lot less expensive to intervene when people are slipping into homelessness than after they've been homeless for a number of years. And we do have a lot of data points on this to inform this. And I think we could do a lot better job of keeping council briefed on all of that and sharing this data up to both council and the other orders of government if we were working better together.
Good. Thank you for that. Councillor Wright? Sorry, Councillor Wright, can you take the chair, and Councillor Rutherford is next.
Okay, I'll take the chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I just had a few follow-up questions, actually, that were twigged by some of the other questioning. In the table in the audit on page 11, there's sort of the cost to the city in the 2021 response activity. But one thing, like, I'm not seeing is, like, we do grants, like, we talk about the Homer Trust grant, but we also do grants to Boyle Street, to the Bissell Center, to the Mustard Seed. I'm thinking about day shelter expansion. How come those were not captured in this audit?
So I think the commentary that's on page 11 is that we attempted to bring the costs of homelessness within the city together. We weren't there to audit the costs of homelessness. We rounded up the best available information that we had, and we put it into the table.
Okay.
And those contracts that you mentioned would all be captured in the affordable housing and homelessness business area. Because those flow through our area usually.
Okay, so those would be captured in that, in the 20 million?
Yeah, for 2021.
Yeah. Okay. That's significant, right? Like, that's a significant amount of money. And we're saying we still don't have the resources. Another thing that that's really struck out to me, and I really want to, because I feel like we're doing this a lot, is it says, this is a direct quote from the audit. The responsible business area absorbed costs, and this can have a negative impact on the delivery of other services for which the business areas are responsible. And I'm seeing that more and more and more. Could administration speak to that a little bit, and how we're going to mitigate absorbing costs, not just for this? I would say this is something that we're seeing in various areas, but then the residual impact it has, I'm not sure is seen by council sometimes.
This is the problem across all public sector organizations where we are asked, we need to prioritize, and we get those marching orders from our elected officials, and then when we are all left with only so much money to do the thing, then some things go above the fold and some things fall below. I don't have an answer, I'm sorry. It's a difficult quandary we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I think though that my request and hope going forward is that admin is more honest about, because there's pilot projects that are saying there's no cost involved, which I am very skeptical of in a very different context. But I think we need to be more honest about the true costs and resourcing for when things are coming to council, because I think that it's so easy to just say, yeah, we can do it because we want to do it and it's important to do it, but we need to be more upfront about that, I think, even to council. So that's my feedback aside, and I think this audit sheds that to light too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fair points. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm back. Councillor Wright, you are next. Go ahead.
You'll take the chair back then?
Yep, I got it back.
Thank you. Just something sort of twigged my thoughts there when Mayor Sohi talked about the causes. And I'm just wondering, is some of it sort of cyclical? If people are getting into shelter or homes that maybe aren't suitable to them, or other matters like evictions, and then they're back out on the street and...
So Councillor Wright, for sure, every person experiencing homelessness is unique and requires unique interventions typically to help them resolve that homelessness. What we do know is that across the Housing First programs that Homer Trust oversees, approximately 80% of people in Housing First that go into those programs are successful in those programs. So there are 20% that may not be successful, and they require a further degree of intervention or support, whether that's a more like supportive housing is sort of the highest level of acuity, sort of Housing First is at the bottom. And then in between that, there's some other levels of support that are like integrated case management, pathways to housing, a whole bunch of programs that are between sort of like a basic level of support and supportive housing. And so Homer Trust has a prioritization system called Coordinated Access that looks at each individual's needs and tries to match them with the placement that will help ensure their highest degree of success. And generally speaking, it is successful, but there are some that require a second attempt or another, or even more, beyond 2 or 3 attempts to be able to sustainably resolve homelessness. And that's all of that work is part of the work that Homer Trust undertakes to provide oversight to the homeless serving sector.
Okay, thank you very much. And then you had also talked about the economic climate, and it's not a good one right now. Do you have your crystal ball? Can you forecast, like when putting together this plan? Will you sort of look at the potential that there is going to be an increase level of houselessness?
It's extremely difficult to project the number of people experiencing homelessness. I think one of the things that is a little easier to predict and something that that's very related is on the housing affordability and need. And so we are getting to a point now with our analysis and data where we're able to say by X year we need X units of affordable housing at this rental level to be able to prevent more people from losing their housing or falling into homelessness. And so I think when it comes to those types of projections, we can do those fairly easily. I will say we look at data on the by names list and trends, and we saw homelessness was rising very quickly during the course of the pandemic. It appears to have stabilized for now, but who knows, with the growing cost of living, inflation, all of these other economic stress, there's a lot of economic uncertainty right now. So it's really difficult to say definitively whether we think it's going to go up or down.
Okay, and so you will be sort of defining what that affordable is, because somebody on AISH making $1,700 or so a month.
Yes.
With cost of gas and food and everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and you'll see that, Council, right in the housing needs assessment report that's coming in a couple weeks. Just some preliminary info around that, and in the fall we're really looking to be crystal clear on this is exactly the price point of shortage of number of units, and then how does our affordable housing investment plan respond to that. And so we are getting by the day more precise in our targeting of our investment towards the type of housing that is most needed.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Jans.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to dig in a little bit into the so what, now what, and ask administration. So as we have these recommendations here, what are, as we look ahead to the fall budget, what are some of the implications, or what could be some of the asks or service packages considered?
Councillor Jens, I think it's important to note, and the reason why there's a bit more time allotted to completing these recommendations is just because we're taking on this work, it doesn't mean that the work of addressing homelessness stops, and there's a lot of work underway with respect to responding and addressing homelessness still. So we are going to take time to think about the plan and think about the structure and the accountability and the metrics, but at the same time, there are interventions that Council's directed us to look at that we know may or may not be effective towards addressing homelessness, and for those that we think have an opportunity, will be effective and would support a better homelessness response on the part of the city, we have put those into the budget process going forward. And so we do have things like the Indigenous-led shelter, which was just recently funded through the CWSB report strategy. We're working on that, and obviously that will be part of our response going forward if Council decides to approve that in the future. We're looking at other things like an augmented encampment response right now that would feed into the 2023 budget. So there's we're working on our affordable housing investment plan, which includes, funding potentially to continue the goals of expanding the universe of supportive housing in Edmonton. So a lot of work is already gone into where could the city invest strategically over the next 4 years to reduce homelessness, and that's all in play right now, and we'll be coming to you through the 2023-2026 budget. for decision.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just want to confirm my napkin math here. There's about 2,700 unhoused neighbors in Edmonton right now. And of that, about 800 are on the chronic, in need of the permanent supportive housing. But then does that mean roughly 1,900 are in the more, would be categorized in the medium to house, not necessarily the easiest to house, but the hardest to house? Did I hear you correctly?
No, Councillor Jones, I don't have the statistics in front of me right now in terms of proportion that are chronically homeless, but what I can tell you is that there's 2,700 people approximately experiencing homelessness. Of that, about 1,500 are provisionally housed, which means that they're either couch surfing, staying with friends, or they're living in a short-term transitional placement that's time limited. And then, or like bridge housing, for example. And then the remainder, there's about 700 that are unsheltered or sleeping outside, and there's approximately 475 or so that on the by names list that are sleeping in shelter. So those are the numbers that we have for you today. But I've heard yourself and the mayor has asked for information about chronicity, and we don't have perfect info on that, but we can work with Home and Trust to get you a memo on that.
Yeah, that would be helpful, just in terms of better understanding who we're talking about. And I'm not sure if you did, if administration saw New York Times did a big profile on Houston, Texas, ending homelessness through this novel strategy called the Housing First model. I'm not sure you've heard about it, but it seemed to jog, wait a minute, that's the approach Edmonton's been doing, and that's the approach when Medicine Hat ended homelessness, that's the approach they've been doing. So I'm seeing around the world more and more recognition of this Housing First model and how successful it is. I guess what I'm trying to understand, sort of reading the auditor's report and then where we're at, are we just missing consistency? Is it resourcing? What is it? What does it actually take? Is it just, do we as a city have to kind of make a more significant investment to just kind of play to decide our role in this space? Like I'm are we in or out is kind of where I feel like as I was reading the report, and maybe I'm misreading that, but I'd be curious just to hear administration or the auditor's response.
Councillor Jens, you're correct to note that Housing First programs, are effective towards ending homelessness, and the City of Houston's seen that result, and I would argue that the City of Edmonton's seen that result too between the period of 2008 and 2017 when we reduced homelessness by 45%, largely relying on Housing First strategies. I think though, obviously we've had an economic shock to speak to that structural factor, so now we've seen a lot of that progress has been undone, but I think at the end of the day, I don't think that there's a silver bullet when it comes to addressing homelessness. I think the key is that everybody needs to work in the same direction and work better together. That's what I told the Provincial's Task Force on Homelessness, and I think that that's the case. Like, obviously more resources are likely required as well when it comes to affordable housing, because there is a huge backlog of affordable housing, which council will hear about in a couple weeks. But in general, I think when it comes to homelessness, there's no silver bullet we can pick up from somewhere else and plop into Edmonton and hope it works. A lot of the infrastructure is in place. It's just getting everybody aligned and pushing in the same direction, I think, is the key.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jans. Councillor Tang.
Thank you so much. I just have a couple of final questions. One around evaluation. I think obviously it's very clear that you've kind of answered the questions and stated that to attribute specific homeless outcome to cities' internal activities and make that causal link is incredibly difficult and impossible, I will argue, especially if we look at those numbers and ask how are we contributing to people getting out of homeless and also living their best lives that they can. I guess one, are you kind of that living their best life, not just put a roof over someone's head? And I'm not sure who to ask, but is that like an area of measures that we'll be considering? And I'm also just curious, what kind of best practice and evaluation will really capture that? Because I think this kind of complexity evaluation is very difficult as well. And I'm thinking things like contribution analysis and where you only capture like a sort of part of the picture.
I think it's difficult to measure things like, are you living your best life on a system level? Like, I think that's easier on a program level. So when you have a specific housing program that's intervening, obviously the city is not super involved in funding the programmatic response, like when it comes to what we are doing around homelessness. But I think that that's probably where most of that opportunity lies. I do think, though, that when we're doing our strategies, like our affordable housing plan or this plan around homelessness, incorporating the perspectives of people with lived experience can help to get at some of these concerns, right? Because you're right, it's not just a house. People need to be supported and work through the barriers that contributed to their economic insecurity in the first place. Yep. And so I think, I think that's key. And then the other thing I would just say is I would hope that with this corporate plan, we could identify data gaps that need to be addressed. And I would see that as being a big part of what we would work on in the first few years, is trying to coordinate across systems better to share data more readily and freely, so that we would have indicators that get at those questions of, sustainability and success. And if we house someone, how long did they stay housed, and those sorts of things. That's right. It's just difficult to have, our data systems aren't integrated sufficiently to allow for that right now.
Yeah, I feel like, I've also come across stories of people who get housed, but the conditions of living were so terrible that they essentially are out of their housing, within a few weeks. And I guess the last thing that's certainly been on my mind throughout the conversation, we need to do what we need to do. If we need to build houses, even though that's not always our role, we just have to do it. I guess I'm wondering but that also means we're accepting more of that downloading of responsibility more and more, and that's not just for us. It allows, other levels of government to further download that to municipalities across the province, and I'm seeing that. And I guess I just want some kind of, will the recommendations correct for that, or at least kind of steer us in a more focused way? I guess that is the work.
Yeah, I think that this is the quandary again. I think quandary is my favorite word for today, because when I read in the newspaper that the wait list for hip replacements is really long, my impulse can't be, we better build some more houses or build some more hospitals. Yep. Or when I hear that a classroom's overcrowded, my impulse can't be, well, I better get some more teachers, right? Like there's jurisdiction, there's roles, there's accountability amongst all orders of government, and there's still the human response, and that is the tension. And it's not an easy place for decision makers to try to navigate, and as administration, we feel it. And totally. That's a very unsatisfying answer.
No, that's okay. But I think I like the focus in this report, so I do appreciate that. Thanks for all your work.
Thank you so much. So, Councillor Tang, thank you so much. That concludes all the questions. Councillor Knack, would you like to move both reports?
Yes, I'll move receipt of information for items 6.1 and 6.2.
Okay. Any questions? Anyone to speak?
Mr. Mayor, if I could speak to it very briefly, sorry.
Sorry, Councillor Stevenson, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to really say thank you for the work that's been done. I know that I personally am always asking for more to be done in the housing and homelessness space, but I really just want to take a moment to share my gratitude with the team for the great work that they do. Particularly recognizing how challenging the situation is and how rarely we have all the resources that we need. I'm really excited for this work and the future work that can be informed in terms of, really making the most of the investments we're making sector-wide, bringing in some more of that coordination piece, and making sure that we do have the measures that we need to be making informed decisions. So, thank you again so much to the team for the great ongoing work in this space, and thank you to the audit team for helping strengthen that work moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Yeah, I just want to reiterate to our city auditor for all the work that you and your team has done. So thank you for that, as well as to our administration for the work you have been leading. This is a very complicated, complex issue to solve, and it requires a lot of hard work, but also, I would say, emotional resiliency, right? Because it's not, it's very difficult work. It's not easy to see people suffering, right? And but please do know that we appreciate all the effort you're making, and I am actually very pleased to hear that that province is willing to look at some of these legacy. This is no government's, this is not one single government's fault. We don't want to point fingers, right? This is a legacy issue of lack of support for Edmonton on ending houselessness and the shelter space. So I'm glad that they're willing to work with us and look forward to that as well, right? So once again, thank you to everyone for all the hard work. Good. All right, so Councillor Knack to close.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Sohi. And so I just want to start by echoing my thanks to everyone. The work that you're doing is incredibly complex, and it has been challenging over the years. As I now approach the end of year 9, it is, I mean, the frustration I feel, I'm sure, is equally matched, if not exceeded, by sometimes the frustration I think you have to deal with because of the lack of coordination. And I appreciate, you know, I don't want to point fingers, and I appreciate your caution, Mayor Sohi, and yet, I mean, this is something, and this isn't a current provincial government issue. This has been a provincial gap beyond over the course of many different governments, not one particular government. So my optimism of their willingness to work is actually quite limited, and I hope they do. I'm very much at the point, and this is probably will be more appropriate for the June 27th conversation, but I do think we are at the point now where we need to ask them to turn over jurisdiction of this to municipalities. I don't know, we're constantly waiting for all 3 orders of government to align on something that is incredibly, I think, easier to solve than we make it out to be, and I'm feeling at the end of waiting, because we just keep waiting and waiting and waiting, and at the same time, the folks who are that have the greatest need aren't getting the help that they need, and that's not due to city staff. We are doing far more today than we were 10 years ago. Started before my time on council. It started during your time as a councillor, and so I know there's been just nonstop work and support for that, but we don't have the resources right now, and so I think it is going to be time very soon, in my opinion, for us to ask the province, unless they are going to actually fulfill what is required under their legislative authority, to consider turning that over to Calgary and Edmonton so that we can get the job done, because we know how to get the job done. Our teams are doing more than is required each and every day, and so I just wanted to share that because I think this audit continues to show we're doing everything we can. We can do it slightly better. There's some improvements as recommended in the audit, but we're constantly waiting on 3 partners, and it hasn't happened in my time on council that we've had all 3 partners aligned, and so I don't want to keep waiting anymore for that. So that will come maybe June 27th. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Councillor Knack. So please vote. We're voting on both them together, right, Madam Clerk? Okay, got it.
That's
6.
correct, both items together.
I vote yes.
Thank you. We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. That is carried. Okay, and our next items are 6.3 and 6.4, cross-referenced, Arterial Roadway Assessment Audit and Administration's response to it. So I'll go to our City Auditor again.
Hello again. Councillor Rutherford, 5 p.m. might be doable. The next audit is about Arterial Roadways. Arterial Roadways serve as a major transportation route that carries a large volume of traffic between different parts of the city. So there's the Ellerslie catchment there. Most of you will be very familiar with 91st Street and Ellerslie Road that cut north, south, east, west. Next slide, please. So in its most simplistic form, I'll try to explain a very complex program. So the city has adopted the ARA as its approach to funding and constructing arterial roadways. The program consists of really 3 main parts. The front part is a developer would come and construct the roadway. The middle part would be administration administering the program, meaning collecting and dispersing funds among some of its activities. And afterwards, there will be a bunch of other developers within the area that actually have to pay for the initial developer building the roadway. The ARA model really shifts the risk, is what it's doing. It's shifting the risk away from the traditional model where a municipality would build or construct and then levy fees from the developers. This is a model that's used in Calgary versus the ARA where we say developers construct, pay for it, and that's it, and we administer in between. So the objective of the audit is really whether Development Services effectively manages the ARA program. Next slide, please. The first two bullets on this slide really speak to some of the things that are working well with respect to the program. The first one is arterial roads are generally built prior to the development of catchment. The collection, the disbursement, and the tracking of the funds are accurate and complete. However, we did identify two areas for improvement. The first one is with respect to guiding documents from two perspectives, having clarity in the guiding documents, but also making sure that the guiding documents are aligned with actual current practice. So I'll use one example that we highlighted in the report, which is at some point arterial roadways need to be widened because the community is being developed. And you're going to have more traffic, more use. If not constructed in a timely manner, it can be frustrating for those who live in that area. So clarity around when you expand is pretty important for both developers and those living in communities. The second finding is with respect to the cost per hectare calculation. There were some assumptions that we found in the spreadsheets, some calculations in the spreadsheets around engineering, administration, and contingency costs, which were counted in two areas. I should, however, note that it is not how one would define as a double count. It is an estimate, but the point, even though it's an estimate, you still have to provide as accurate an estimate as possible so you can figure out the costs. The other thing is we found that there were some errors in the calculations in the spreadsheet which could have been identified through more rigorous review. So we made two recommendations: update the guiding documents and really document the rationale for some of the assumptions made behind the calculations and conduct more rigorous reviews. Thanks to the Development Services branch team and their expertise on a pretty technical matter. I'd also like to thank the team. I think Jason is somewhere near Thomas and Janine, because I've spent hours listening to how the system works, and I wake up in the middle of the night with nightmares and still confused sometimes. So thank you to both.
Thank you so much. We'll go to our administration for a response.
Thank you. I'm joined here this morning with Mark Pivovar, Acting Director of Subdivision and Development Coordination, and Jim Wood, General Supervisor in Development Coordination. So really want to thank the City Auditor for the thorough audit of the Arterial Roadway Assessment Program that's administered by Development Services. The professional way that we work together to involve our team and the industry throughout the process was very inclusive. And as noted in the audit report, administration accepts the findings and the work has already begun to address both recommendations by Q1 of 2023. So thank you, and we are here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. This was also exempted by Councillor Knack. Go ahead, Councillor Knack.
Thanks, Mayor Sohi, and again, thanks for all the work on this. Just a little bit of a few questions related to in the audit, you identified sometimes where costs were underestimated. And I guess what I just wanted to confirm, is there any situation where we've underestimated costs and has the city been responsible to make up that? So if we have a requirement for developer to build, there was a calculation error, who picks up that error? Is that us, or is that still the developer? It's still the requirement for them?
Councillor Knack, I'll start, and maybe Mr. Pivovar can complement my answer, but the arterial roads within the basin that are identified to be developer funded are all reconciled through the developer funded part. So the city doesn't contribute to that. There are, as you may recall, some areas where the city is responsible for funding of arterial roads, so that would be different.
Yes, yeah, we have like $250 million of our own work to do, but that's our own problem to sort out. Maybe a budget. Okay, that was really it. That was my question. Thanks for the great work on that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Knack. Councillor Wright.
Hi, thank you. And again, this provides me a greater understanding as to why 34th Street over the past 30 years gets paved a block or two every year because it's just done in stages as developers. So that explains a lot to myself and my neighbors. But I do appreciate looking for more consistency, I guess, and transparency going forward. So thank you to the city auditor for that. And I'm just wondering, is there a point prior to the subdivision or development permit time? Is there a point, I guess, further upstream that we could put these specific requirements in place so that the developers know and citizens know?
So, Councillor Wright, when we advance a neighborhood structure plan, that also aligns with where the arterial roads are identified, and then there is an arterial roadway bylaw update that's done at that time to articulate the developer-led responsibilities. And so then through the staging and phasing of development is when we condition the requirement for a developer to construct an arterial road. And that's where you see the staging and phasing of an arterial road from one entrance to another, as an example. And that's based on the engineering and planning related to traffic volumes and what makes sense from an access perspective. And I'll maybe look to Mr. Pivovar if there's anything more you'd like to add.
No, that's correct.
So these conditions, though, will be established up front. So even at that neighborhood structure plan phase, they would have an idea of.
The conditions are established through the subdivision process. But at a neighborhood structure plan stage, the arterial roadways are identified of where they are and what's developer responsibilities.
But if we're going to have these policies, like with specific numbers, this is my thought, is you're going to say at what percentage of development would certain roads be required to be put in?
Understood. And part of the recommendation was to provide greater clarity on the guiding documents and establishing a criteria for the phasing and staging of arterial roads. So we'll be working on that so that it's clear when additional lanes would be triggered for construction to a developer.
Okay, thank you. I think that does answer my question. I'm sorry, Mr. Pivovar, did you have something else to add?
No, I was just going to clarify that at the subdivision stage, that's when we have the ability through the MGA to actually condition those. But developers are aware of all the arterials in that catchment due to like the NSPs and due to sort of that arterial roadways for development bylaw. They know which ones are they responsible for, and they start pre-planning for it by doing concept plans well ahead of subdivision. But subdivision is the point where we actually condition the work to be done.
Okay, and according to the report, you're going to be updating the policy.
We're updating guiding documents and the methodology for the review and calculations of arterial roadways.
Okay, that provide greater clarity to all involved. Thank you very much, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Principe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Quach, you had said that there was engagement with the developers, correct? With this?
Yes, Councillor.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, good. And Ms. Petrin, so I did read on attachment 1, page 7, the branch's transportation engineers use professional judgment to determine when an arterial road would be widened, correct?
That's correct. And I think we've had a bit of a discussion through our conversations at public hearing as well around sort of planning, engineering, traffic volumes, safety that would help establish when further upgrades are needed.
Okay, so will this audit now may have more clarification?
Part of what the audit will do is that we will update our guiding documents so that it's clear when more clear when those triggers are for upgrading a road from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, as an example.
Okay, that's great. That's really good. And the ARA steering and working committees, there are members from administration and the development community, correct?
That's correct.
And who in the city, does it change, or is there someone that's typically like on the committee right now?
It's specifically members of Development Services branch that work with the steering committees and both the working committees also. Yep.
Okay, I see. And recommendation 2. So this is, for the recommendation, that's for areas that have already been subdivided? Or like?
So recommendation 2 is around updating the methodology for reviews and calculations of arterial roadways. So that if an arterial roadway is already constructed, then not necessarily applicable, but it may be seen still in the basin that is yet to develop. So figuring out clarity on unit rates, the assumptions that are used to calculate those unit rates, and then our quality control in terms of establishing what is owed, that will be applicable to any application going forward.
Okay, that's great. That was a really good job figuring out what my question was. And you answered it very well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor Principe. Councillor Wright, do you have more questions?
Just one quick one. Well, I think it's quick. Will this then also incorporate any existing, or will it apply to any existing sort of agreement structure plans when the new policy comes into effect?
Councillor Wright, any changes that are made, whether it's to a guiding document, to the ARA bylaw, or to our policy and procedures, will be applicable to everything moving forward in terms of arterial roads and how we condition them through subdivision.
Perfect. Thank you. It was quick. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. I just have one question, which is that the developers are responsible for building these arterial roads for their share. And when do we take them over? Is the time frame of, is it 2 years later that we take them over, or what is it?
That's correct. Upon completion of construction, there's a construction completion certificate which says the road's done, open for public, and then there's a 2-year warranty period for most transportation type assets. And at that point, we would do a final inspection to make sure everything's still good and they cover all that warranty. And then at that point, the city then takes it into its inventory as an arterial road that city operations would then own and maintain and operate.
So how do we determine whether they are building to the standards that these roads last for the lifespan, whatever that lifespan might be? It's 20 years, 25 years, or 15 years. How do we ensure that they're building to the quality standards that they don't only last 2 years or 4 years, but they do last the whole lifespan?
Sure. As part of the design review is done and reviewed by the city administration to ensure that it's certainly meeting all the city standards for an arterial type road. And then we have very stringent inspection processes and very dedicated inspection staff that work specifically with these developers on their arterial road projects. And they will do random audit inspections during construction, and they will be doing also those official construction completion inspections and final inspections. So there is a very detailed inspection process that's happening to ensure that all the materials being used, all the construction being done is meeting city standards at a bare minimum. Okay. And then we would not take that on until that is finally finished and completed. Yeah.
So has there been incidents where we have gone back to the developers saying, you did not build this to the standards, we took it over, but we found these deficiencies, and then you're responsible for repairing those deficiencies?
Usually under the agreement, there's a very specific time limit for a year after that warranty period that if we do see some workmanship issues, we can come back and have them fix them up. But we haven't seen and used that clause a lot recently in any of the developments. So we are seeing some good long-term roads being constructed. Okay. And then just through environmental effects, just how the road slowly deteriorates over time. But we are seeing roads lasting a little bit longer based on the areas.
Oh, got it. So there has not been any significant issues that way you would say, well, these were not built to the standards?
No, nothing significant. Like a road just completely fell apart a year after a developer's left. Like we're getting a long-term.
Maybe significant maybe significant is not the right word, but have you seen other concerns that you would say, had we done this, had we flagged this in the 2-year period, we wouldn't be paying the cost from the taxpayers?
We don't see that to an intent, and then as the standards, we do see some of those opportunities to say update the standards to accordingly to kind of close some of those issues with materials. So we do kind of use that information to move forward and make new construction specifications for sure. Good. Through our research for engineering services.
Good. All right. Thank you for that answer. Okay, that concludes the questions. So Councillor Knack, you exempted these as well, so you want to move them?
I would be happy to move receipt of information on items 6.3 and 6.4.
6.3, 6.4. Anyone, any questions? Anyone to speak? Seeing none, please vote. Oops, I'm yes.
I'm yes too.
Thank you. We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. That is carried. Okay. So just in case all of us are clear, committee members, that we are only scheduled till noon for this committee, not till 5 o'clock. Only till noon for this committee. Okay, so we have next items are 6.5 and 6.6, Office of the City Auditor Recommendation Follow-Up Dashboard Report and Administration's response to that. So over to you, our City Auditor.
All right, just a few notes regarding the outstanding recommendations. We're continuing to make very good progress on the recommendations and being implemented in a timely manner. I attended a CAAF forum about 2 weeks ago where it was a gathering of city auditors and auditor generals right across Canada. And I can report back to you generally that other municipalities are challenged with implementing the recommendations. So I think this is more of a shout out to administration and this office who are connecting regularly and contributing to the timely implementation of recommendations. If I reflect back on December 2021, 2 audit committees ago, we had 29 outstanding recommendations. As of today, we have 14. So in a matter of 6 months, we're able to cut that in half. So, you know, again, shout out to administration and the office.
Thank you. Any comments from administration? They're gone. Administration's gone. Okay.
They will echo my sentiment. No, I'm teasing.
They were not here to hear. They were not here to hear your compliments. Okay. All right. Councillor Rutherford.
Yeah, I actually didn't have questions so much about the content. I think you're right. It is a good news story in terms of seeing the progress that's been made. However, one thing that did come to light for me recently is the kind of the lack of accessibility of this dashboard for residents. They have to know to go to audit committee, go to this item and find this attached. And I had kind of expected that, you know, the city auditor webpage would actually have this readily available as an easier accessibility for folks to see where we're at with the recommendations. I just wanted to ask I wanted to kind of ask about that specific piece.
Okay, so Janine just told me that these reports are on the website, this specific report. But what is in our 4-year strategic plan that we're going to be working on over the next probably 2 or 3 quarters is develop better interactive dashboards that includes this recommendation report. I think there are other things that we can report back to committee that speak to the effectiveness and the efficiency of the office itself, and I think it's important to share that type of information as well on a regular basis. But that's going to take a bit of time. Our data scientist joined only several months ago, and he's a busy gentleman.
So I guess I'd like clarity on where, because I just went to the city auditor page, reports, and I see the annual work plan and an audit committee schedule. So again, I'm just saying I don't find that is very intuitive in if it is on there. And I distinctly remember having an inquiry from a resident, and we had to get a PDF emailed to our office to send to that resident. So I know it is on the website because it's on the website in this agenda package. But again, that is not intuitive for folks to find. And I just think that this is something for many Edmontonians that's so important to know. Well, that was a great audit that was done, and there's some really great recommendations, but unless they're actively following our committees, there's no way for them to really access that information easily. And so that was just my piece of feedback, and I really think it should almost be like its own, even if you say in this section, you know, reports master listing, but I almost feel like, you know, the dashboard could be there. So just a piece of feedback and something I think would be really helping in our transparency and accountability to the public. Any thoughts on that, City Auditor?
Thank you for the feedback, Councillor, and absolutely, I see Janine jotting down feverishly. We'll take your feedback. It is one of the things that we want to look at in terms of our website and where we place information so that it is easily accessible. So note it, and we will take it back to the drawing board.
And I know that there's like an ideal of like having this dashboard in the future, but I think just the PDF, I like from my experience with accessibility, the more places people can find it, then it doesn't matter how they prefer to search, whether they go to the audit committee or they go to your website, they'll still find, they'll end up at the same information. And that's, I think, my hope is that can be the case. And if it's a short-term solution of just the PDFs on an extra link that's not got flashy neon lights, but close, that would be great. And then my other question was around, we kind of talk about the ones that are overdue or still outstanding. I think it would be really impactful to also have a PDF that talks about all of the recommendations that have been complete in some sort of summary somewhere as well, because I think that's also very impactful and something that I know that constituents from my ward are looking for too, is it, you know, because even if they see this, well, they're like, well, what happened to that one? But I think highlighting all the work that administration has done and the effectiveness of these audits in changing our practices and policies within the city, I think is a really good thing to highlight as well. So I just think these are really great at reports. Those are just two personal, and I don't know if others feel that way, but those are two things that I think would really help with that feedback loop to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Wright.
Thank you. I absolutely agree. Promoting the good news stories is always good communication, I think. But I'm just wondering, in administration's response, you only look at items that are past due 6 months? So I'm just wondering why we put a sort of a due date on them, but we're not worried about them until 6 months past the due date.
I can speak to that question, Councillor Wright. I think that administration closely monitors the status of the recommendations, and that as a part of our response to the auditor's dashboard, we focus on the recommendations that are more than 6 months overdue, but we are working really closely with the Office of the Auditor to close the recommendations within the time frame.
Okay, then I guess my question to the city auditor is that standard audit practice?
It's good practice to regularly engage with administration to see where they're at in terms of implementing the recommendations. So there are a couple of processes in the background that you don't see behind the report that helps us get things done in a timely manner. The first one is our office shares with administration a monthly report on the outstanding recommendations. We generally will reach out almost every quarter to administration that's responsible for implementing the recommendations and having conversations around, hey, how's progress? Are we on the right track towards meeting those dates? So I think some of those good practices that are behind the report are helping us become much more effective in implementing the recommendations.
Okay, so there is sort of continuous monitoring. It's not just left aside or forgotten.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, Councillor, on both the Office of City Auditor and administration.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much, and thank you for all the work that you and your team are doing.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. So that concludes the questions. Councillor Rutherford, do you want to move the recommendations?
Yeah, I move the receipt of information of 6.5 and 6.6.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Any questions or anyone to speak? Seeing none, please vote.
I vote yes.
Thank you. We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. That is carried.
Yeah, I would like to change my vote.
Okay, Councillor Rutherford would like to change her vote on the minutes now that she has seen the minutes.
So I'd like to move to reconsider the vote on the minutes?
Yes, it's to reconsider.
Councillor Knack, can you do that?
Yeah, I have to move to reconsider because you can't, it has to be from the prevailing
Councillor
side, so I'll move to reconsider, yeah.
Thank you. Please vote to reconsider the vote on the acceptance of the minutes.
Vote yes.
We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. That is carried. Councillor Knack, you want to move the minutes again?
Yes, I'm moving the same list of minutes that I
You got to
moved
read
last
them
time.
again. You got to read them again.
I don't know, fine. All right, the March 18th, 2022 Audit Committee meeting, the March 18th, 2022 Audit Selection Committee, the April 12th, 2022 Special Audit Committee as amended, the May 18th, 2022 Audit Committee non-regular, and the May 26th, 2022 Audit Selection Committee.
Okay, please vote. Yeah. Yeah.
We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. That is carried. No motions pending, private reports. Any notices of motions or motions without customary notice? I see none. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.